defeats, Chris Philp, since we talked about it last. 13 defeats in the House of Lords. It must be time for the government to rethink.
Well, it's very disappointing that the unelected House of Lords have tried to tamper with things that were in the party's manifesto. Starter homes were in the manifesto, the social housing right to buy was in the manifesto, and I think the government is right to press on and get those implemented.
Yes, I mean, the principle was in the manifesto, but not actually some of the detail, which has now come out, and that surely is what the Lords is doing. It's doing its job. It's scrutinising what they would call bad legislation beneath the principle.
Well, some of these things are simply wrecking amendments. For example, they've proposed that local authorities should be given discretion over whether to have starter housing or not, which is clearly designed just to undermine the whole policy. The point of the policy is to help young people in their 20s and 30s get onto the housing ladder, and some of these amendments are designed just to wreck that. Now, other amendments have been accepted. I was looking at the list this morning before this afternoon's debate, which John and I will both be at, and probably something like 2/3 or even 3/4 of the Lords' amendments have been accepted. But where those amendments are designed to undermine and frustrate what was in the manifesto, helping people onto the housing ladder, we will stand firm and stick to our guns.
I mean, John Healey, do you actually object to the principle of housing association tenants being able to own their own homes?
We've opposed this extension of the right to buy for housing association tenants because it will be funded by the forced sale of council homes, which will go to overseas investors and to help to buy-to-let landlords.
Right.
Could go to
Do you
anyone.
know that? I thought the forced sale,
Yes,
as you say, the funds would actually go to fund this.
What this legislation is doing is forcing councils to sell the best of their homes when they become vacant to whoever they can sell them to in order to pay the money to George Osborne to fund the discount for the right to buy for the housing association tenants. And that's why, quite obviously, this is going to lead to a huge loss of affordable rented homes right across the country, as Shelter, the Chartered Institute for Housing also say. And the other flaw with this, unfortunately, is these so-called starter homes are going to leave many wannabe first-time buyers completely unable to afford the sort of costs that still will be involved.
We'll come on to the starter homes in just a minute, but just answer John Healey's claim then that actually the money that will come from those council homes will not go into replacing council stock. It will go into the Treasury's pocket.
Well, that's not completely true, because the legislation says that in London there'll be a 2-for-1 replacement. Thanks to Zach Goldsmith, our excellent candidate for Mayor of London, every council home in London that's sold, there'll be 2 replacements, and outside London it'll be a 1-for-1 replacement.
Right.
Which is good.
It's entirely true. The legislation creates the power for ministers to do an annual levy on councils that still have council homes. That will be cash going straight to George Osborne, an annual levy on councils to pay for the discount on housing associations. So it's a cash grab, making councils and those who need these homes pay the costs of a policy that government itself should be paying for.
But it also says there must be a 2-for-1 replacement in London and a 1-for-1 replacement outside.
I mean, does it matter, John Healey, if there is as long as there is a replacement?
It would matter a lot if this was a replacement 1-for-1 or 2-for-1 like for like, but the replacement allows a rented council home or housing association home in London to be replaced by one of these so-called new affordable homes that could be on sale for up to £450,000.
So it isn't like for like, is it, Chris Philp? I mean, you have to be honest with people in terms of what is actually being replaced. If a local authority is selling a 4-bedroom council house and the money from that sale is going to the Treasury, will there be another house of that size, or 2, if it's in London, built in the same part of that authority?
Well, it won't necessarily be built in the same part. Right. It'll be built within London. And let me explain why.
London's a big place.
It is. Well, take as an example Camden Council, which I used to be a councillor there many years ago. They have some sort of £1 million plus sort of Bloomsbury apartments, one of which, by the way, Frank Dobson still lives in. He got it when he was leader of Camden Council 30-odd years ago. Now, it's ridiculous that a local authority is providing supposedly social housing that's worth £1.5 million a unit to someone like Frank Dobson. It's just common sense to sell that unit and build 2 units in its place. It's just common sense.
And also, I mean, on the starter home scheme, I mean, if we take what Chris Philp has said, I mean, this is about helping young people get onto the housing ladder, which a lot of them would like to do, and it's becoming more and more difficult, rather than, as many people see it, throwing money down the drain for high rent.
It's not just becoming more difficult, it's becoming almost impossible for young people. There's 250,000 fewer people under 35 now owning their own home than when David Cameron became Prime Minister. But there's a grain of a good idea in these starter homes, but the way the government is doing it simply means that it's beyond the reach of many people on ordinary incomes. In Chris Philp's constituency in Croydon, you're still going to need, even with this huge taxpayer discount and subsidy, you're still going to need a deposit of 61,000, an average income of about 64,000, and the average full-time salary for an individual in Croydon is 31,000 a year.
You're shaking your head. How much will you need? Because even shelter... The housing charity Shelter saying by 2020 someone trying to buy a starter home in London, the ones that we are talking about, will need an annual salary of £77,000 a year and a deposit of £98,000. That is eye-watering.
Well, if those figures were true, they would be eye-watering, but they're not true. Let me talk you to the figures for my borough, Croydon. It's London's biggest borough. I'm Croydon South MP. The average flat in Croydon is £240,000 privately. Knock off a 20% discount, that's £190,000, okay? You can get a 95% mortgage with Help to Buy, so you need a £10,000 deposit. Now, I think £10,000, while a lot of money, is in the reach of most people. If you have a couple buying together, which you normally do, getting 4 times their joint income, you can be earning £22,500 each, so £45,000 in total to afford that mortgage. Now, I think 2 people earning £22,000 with a £10,000 deposit is a big step forward. Not perfect, doesn't solve everything, but it's a huge step forward, and I would hope that my Labour opposite numbers this afternoon support this measure to help our young people onto the housing ladder.
Right, John Healey, I'm going to have to ask you about what's going on in the Labour Party at the moment, because you will probably heard the earlier reports on our programme, but there were reports yesterday that some members of the Shadow Cabinet are considering standing down after Thursday's local elections, after the way the leadership has dealt with anti-Semitism. Are you one of them?
I'm not. I doubt whether that's the case, and for my money, what all of us need to be doing is fighting the elections this week, fighting the referendum next month, and trying to win back a hearing and support from the millions of people that lost us and left us at the last election.
Do you think you will make gains?
As far as my colleagues that I know well around the Shadow Cabinet table, that's what we're trying to do.
Right. I mean, we've heard reports that MPs are rallying around Margaret Hodge as a possible stalking horse in a leadership challenge to Jeremy Corbyn. Have you heard about that?
In 19 years in opposition and in government, I've lost count of the number of stalking horses and future leaders I've come across. I mean, for me, this is part of what turns people off politics. Where the whispers in the Westminster world...
They seem more than whispers.
Really make politicians seem like we're more concerned with our own problems rather than the difficulties that they face day to day.
But if Labour performs badly on Thursday, John Healey, does Jeremy Corbyn have any choice but to go?
Of course he does. He's elected with a very strong mandate within the Labour Party. These elections on Thursday are going to be tough. I mean, the numbers of council seats always ebb and flow with the political cycle. And
there hasn't been an opposition. There hasn't been the leader of an opposition in recent times who's actually lost seats in the first year at council elections.
But any political analyst will tell you most of these seats were elected 4 years ago in 2012, which was a high water mark.
This sounds like you're softening people up for losses for Labour.
Well, prediction's a mug's game. But the long and the short of it is, I've been visiting councils right across the country, from Stevenage to Lincoln to Plymouth to Exeter, and we're fighting. We're fighting for every vote, and we're fighting for every councillor, and my main concern is that we still have good Labour councils like those.
Well, Jeremy Corbyn made some predictions this morning, John.
Able to show people what a difference Labour in power can make.
Corbyn's predicted this morning that you will make gains. Is he a mug?
Corbyn said this morning we're fighting for every vote and every councillor.
Well, we know that, obviously. Right. I mean,
but he predicted gains.
Now, we're going to come on